She really outdid herself this time, the senior partner whispered, nodding toward the front of the room. Megan beamed, her teeth white and predatory under the recessed LED lights of the boardroom. On the 98-inch screen, my 3 weeks of labor, a 140-page deep dive into our Q2 market vulnerabilities, was being rebranded as her spontaneous weekend project. The air in the room smelled of expensive espresso and the metallic tang of high-end air filtration. Megan didn't just steal the data, she stole the cadence of my thoughts. She presented my proprietary algorithm as if she'd birthed it over a glass of Chardonnay on a Sunday afternoon. I just felt we couldn't wait until the monthly review, Megan said, her voice a perfect blend of mock humility and corporate ambition. She looked at me for a split second, a look of pity. To her, I was just the quiet girl in the $4,000 suit who did her spreadsheets. I was the administrative support who didn't have the personality for leadership. I didn't scream. I didn't lean over to the CEO and whisper the truth. I simply adjusted my cuff, felt the cool weight of my watch against my wrist, and watched the cursor blink on the screen. I noted the exact moment she claimed my $2.4 million revenue projection as her own discovery. I wasn't angry. I was focused. I was watching a thief walk into a vault I had personally rigged with explosives. By this time next week, Megan wouldn't just be out of a job. She would be a case study in professional suicide. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Have you ever had a Megan in your office who thought they could climb the ladder using your rungs? Let me know if you've ever had to watch someone else take the credit for your sleepless nights. The boardroom erupted into a polite chorus of excellent work and vibrant initiative. I watched Megan soak it in, her posture expanding with every compliment. Most people in my position would have felt a hot surge of adrenaline, the kind that makes your hands shake and your voice crack when you try to defend yourself. But I've always found that heat is a waste of energy. Heat causes friction, and friction slows down the machine. I chose to be cold. In the world of high finance consulting, there are 2 types of people, the engines and the ornaments. I am an engine. I build the systems that move the money. Megan is an ornament. She exists to be looked at, to talk, and to take credit for the movement she doesn't understand. She saw my silence as a weakness, a sign of a submissive office mouse who was content to be a ghostwriter for her rising stardom. She didn't realize that my silence was actually a laboratory. I sat there, sipping my water, observing the way she struggled to answer a technical question about the third quarter pivot. She fumbled for a second, then laughed it off with a charming remark about not getting bogged down in the weeds. The partners laughed with her. They didn't see the vacuity behind her eyes, but I did. I saw a woman who had become so addicted to the high of the win that she had forgotten how to actually do the work. I wasn't a victim. I was a hunter who had just identified the exact scent of the prey. Megan thought she had spent the last 6 months climbing over me. In reality, she had spent the last 6 months making herself entirely dependent on my brain. She had no foundation of her own. She was a skyscraper built on sand, and I was about to stop being the sand. Megan arrived at the firm 18 months ago, with a resume that looked like a highlight reel and a personality that acted like a vacuum. She was hired as a senior associate, the same level as me, but we operated in 2 different universes. I spent my mornings in the data trenches, tracking $50 million portfolios and identifying the microscopic leaks in our clients' cash flows. Megan spent her mornings at the Power coffee shop across the street, ensuring the right partners saw her holding a green juice and a leather-bound notebook she never actually filled. The exploitation didn't start with a bang. It started with a favor. "Hey, I'm running behind on the Harrison deck," she'd say, leaning over my cubicle with a scent of expensive peony perfume that always felt like a threat. "Could you just run the numbers for the tax implications? You're so much faster at the technical stuff than I am." I did it. Not because I was nice, but because I wanted the firm to succeed. But when the Harrison meeting happened, I wasn't invited. I found out later through an internal memo that Megan had received a performance bonus of $15,000 for her innovative tax restructuring strategy. My name wasn't even in the footnotes. By the 6-month mark, a pattern had solidified. It was a tax I paid for being the quiet one. Over the last year, I calculated that Megan had effectively offloaded 70% of her analytical workload onto my desk. She would send me rough drafts that were actually blank templates, and I would return polished, client-ready assets. In public, she treated me with a patronizing sisterhood that made my skin crawl. During a team lunch at a bistro, where the appetizers cost more than a paralegal's daily wage, she once patted my hand in front of our department head. "We honestly don't know what we'd do without you," she told the table, her eyes sparkling with artificial warmth. "You are the ultimate administrative backbone. Every star needs a stagehand, right?" The table laughed. Our department head, a man who valued culture over competence, nodded. "Everyone has their lane, Megan. Yours is the spotlight, hers is the support." I didn't correct them. I just ate my salad and thought about the $1.2 million in billable hours I had generated that Megan had claimed as her own. I thought about the $85,000 raise she had negotiated based on my proprietary market entry model. She viewed me as a tool, like a high-end printer or a fast internet connection. She didn't think a tool could have its own agenda. The financial disparity was the most clinical part of it. Megan was living a life funded by my intellect. She bought a condo in the Seaport District, a $950,000 unit with floor-to-ceiling windows. She posted photos of her new Porsche Cayenne, tagging it #hardworkpaysoff. I knew her base salary. I also knew her commission structure. She was only making those payments because of the performance tiers she was hitting using my brain. She had built a lifestyle that required a constant stream of stolen genius to maintain. She was leveraged to the hilt, emotionally, socially, and financially. She was a parasite that had grown so large it thought it was the host. I began to keep a private ledger. I tracked every file I sent her, every quick question she asked over Slack, and every time she presented my work as her own. I didn't save these for HR. HR is there to protect the firm's reputation, and Megan was currently the firm's rising star. Bringing her down through official channels would be a messy, he said, she said HR nightmare that would leave me labeled as difficult to work with. No, I needed something cleaner. I needed Megan to be the one to pull the trigger on her own career. I needed to provide her with a piece of work so brilliant, so revolutionary, and so utterly fraudulent that she wouldn't be able to resist stealing it, and wouldn't be able to survive the fallout. The reason Megan felt so safe stealing from me wasn't just her ego. It was the environment I had carefully curated for her. In psychology, there's a concept called intermittent reinforcement. If you reward a behavior occasionally, the subject becomes addicted to the cycle. I had spent months becoming Megan's most reliable win. Whenever she was in a corner, I was the silent engine that bailed her out. I made her feel untouchable. I played the part of the scapegoat with clinical precision. In our Monday morning scrums, I would purposefully offer safe, boring observations. I let her interrupt me. I let her correct my data in front of the team, even when I knew her corrections were technically flawed. I was feeding her a false sense of intellectual superiority. I wanted her to believe that I was a bottomless well of high-level output with zero ego to protect it. The office culture was my greatest ally. Our firm, like many in the high-stakes consulting world, had a golden child dynamic. Megan was the golden child, the one who looked the part, spoke the jargon, and brought energy to the room. I was the workhorse. The partners didn't want the workhorse to lead. They wanted the workhorse to stay in the stable and produce. I watched as Megan began to outsource her entire critical thinking process to me. She stopped verifying the data I sent her. She stopped asking how I reached my conclusions. Why would she? I was the reliable admin who always delivered perfection. She had become so conditioned to my competence that she viewed my work as a natural resource, like air or water. She didn't think it could be poisoned. This was the sunk cost fallacy in action, but for her reputation. She had built her entire brand on being the strategic visionary. To admit she didn't understand the work would be to admit she was a fraud. She was locked into the lie. I remember one specific evening around 7 p.m. when the office was mostly empty. She walked by my desk, her heels clicking with an aggressive, entitled rhythm. She didn't even say hello. She just dropped a stack of folders on my desk. "I need these audited by 9 a.m., she said, not looking at me. "And make the visualizations pop more. The partners find your style a bit clinical." "Of course, Megan," I said softly. I didn't look up. She was so comfortable, so sure of her dominance, that she had stopped looking for traps. She had no idea that I was no longer auditing her work. I was mapping her exit. The breaking point didn't happen during a grand argument. It happened in the quiet, sterile silence of the communal break room on a Tuesday afternoon. I was refilling my water bottle when I heard Megan's voice drifting from the hallway. She was talking to Sarah, the head of talent acquisition, the woman who holds the keys to the partner track promotions. "I'm worried about our internal support staff," Megan said, her voice dripping with that faux concerned leader tone she practiced in the mirror. "Specifically, the analysts like her. They're great at the grunt work, but there's a total lack of big picture capability. I'm essentially having to rewrite every report she touches just to make it client-facing. It's exhausting being the only one providing the intellectual heavy lifting." I stood perfectly still, the water overflowing from my bottle, cold against my hand. "We appreciate you carrying that load, Megan," Sarah replied. "We're looking at the Q4 promotions. Your name is at the top of the list. We need visionaries in the corner offices." That was it. The cold clarity hit me like a physical weight. Megan wasn't just stealing my work. She was actively sabotaging my reputation to ensure I remained her permanent, low-level ghostwriter. She was making sure I would never be promoted, because if I moved up, her supply of stolen genius would vanish. She was burying me alive to build her throne on my grave. I walked back to my desk, wiped the water from my hand, and opened a blank document. I didn't feel a flicker of anger. Anger is a distraction. I felt the precise, rhythmic calm of a demolition expert. She wanted visionary? I would give her a vision that would blind her. I looked at my calendar. The annual CEO strategy review was in 10 days. It was the one meeting of the year where the golden children had to prove their worth to the man who actually founded the firm, a man who hated fluff and lived for ROI. I pulled up the design software and began crafting the first slide of the optimal revenue integration strategy. I titled the file Confidential, Final Architecture. I didn't leave it in a hidden folder. I left it right on the desktop of my tablet. I knew Megan. I knew her greed was faster than her intellect. I knew she was already looking for her next weekend project to steal. The trap was set. Now, I just had to make the bait look like a masterpiece. I spent the next 48 hours constructing a cathedral of nothingness. This wasn't just a slide deck, it was a psychological weapon. I titled it ORIS, Optimal Revenue Integration Strategy. The name itself was a masterpiece of corporate camouflage. It sounded vital, expensive, and completely undeniable. I opened my personal laptop at home, away from the firm's servers. I needed this to be a ghost in the machine. I started with the aesthetics. I used a high-gloss, minimalist template with deep navy and slate gray accents. I chose a font that screamed Silicon Valley breakthrough, sleek, modern, and authoritative. Then came the content. I didn't use obvious nonsense. That would be too easy to spot. Instead, I used high-density jargon. I spent hours weaving together sentences that sounded profound but contained zero actionable data. I created charts that looked like they were tracking explosive growth, but the axes weren't labeled with actual units. I used phrases like asynchronous growth verticals and synergistic monetization loops. On slide 7, I created a complex Venn diagram where the 3 circles were labeled agile scalability, holistic paradigm shifting, and core competency integration. The overlapping center, the supposed secret sauce of the strategy, was labeled the ORIS nexus. It was a polished vacuum. It was a hall of mirrors, designed to reflect whatever brilliance the observer wanted to see. I made sure to include hyper-specific, fabricated financial projections. To an untrained eye, or a greedy one, it looked like I had found a way to reduce operational overhead by 22% while increasing client retention by 14% through automated emotional intelligence mapping. I wrote a 25-page technical white paper to accompany the deck. It was filled with $50 words and complex equations that, if actually solved, resulted in $1 equals $1. It was mathematically sound, but logically bankrupt. The total projected found revenue at the bottom of the summary slide was $4.8 million. I knew that number would be the hook. Megan's lifestyle, the seaport condo, the Porsche, the designer wardrobe, was built on the edge of a cliff. She needed a $4.8 million win to secure her visionary status and the massive year-end bonus that came with it. I practiced the accidental reveal. I moved the file onto my work tablet and changed the thumbnail to a high-resolution 3D render of a golden gear system. I named the folder Project Aurora, Do Not Open. I knew Megan's psychology better than she knew herself. If I handed it to her, she might be suspicious. But if she discovered it, if she felt like she was outsmarting me by finding my hidden masterpiece, she would claim it as her own without a second thought. She would assume I was just too quiet and admin-minded to realize the value of what I had created. I also did my financial forensics. I looked up the CEO's history. Before he founded the firm, he was a quantitative analyst for a Tier 1 hedge fund. He was a man who ate buzzwords for breakfast and spat out the bones. He demanded practical application. I was building a bridge that looked like solid steel but was made of wet cardboard. I knew Megan would be the first one to try and drive a tank across it. The final touch was the Easter egg. Deep in the metadata of the file, I embedded a small, hidden timestamp that proved the file was created on my personal device, but I stripped all other identifying tags. To anyone looking at the surface, it was a pristine, unclaimed treasure. By Thursday night, the trap was live. The Optimal Revenue Integration Strategy was sitting on my tablet, glowing like a siren in the dark. I felt a cold, rhythmic pulse of satisfaction. This wasn't revenge, it was a correction. The trap was set for Friday's networking lunch at the Glass House, a high-altitude restaurant where the partners went to feel important and the associates went to be seen. I arrived early, choosing a corner table that offered a clear view of the entrance. I placed my tablet on the white linen cloth, the screen intentionally active, showing the Project Aurora folder icon with its glowing golden gear. I didn't have to wait long. Megan walked in, trailing the scent of peonies and overconfidence. She was wearing a new cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than my first car. She sat down, her eyes immediately darting to my tablet. "You're working through lunch?" she asked, her voice light, but her eyes were already scanning the screen. "You really need to learn to delegate or you'll burn out before you hit 35. "It's nothing," I said, my voice intentionally small. I quickly flipped the cover closed, but I left the magnetic latch just slightly loose. "Just some theoretical modeling I've been playing with. It's probably too abstract for the current Q4 goals." "Abstract is my specialty," she said with a sharp, hungry smile. 10 minutes into the meal, I accidentally spilled a splash of mineral water near my seat. I stood up with a look of mild panic. "I'll be right back. I need to dry this off before it stains." I walked toward the restroom, but I didn't go inside. I stood by the frosted glass partition and checked my watch. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Through the gap in the partition, I watched Megan. She didn't hesitate. She looked left, then right, and then her hand shot out like a viper. She flipped open my tablet. I saw her eyes widen as she scrolled through the first 5 slides of the ORIS deck. She saw the $4.8 million figure. She saw the high-density jargon. I could almost see the gears turning in her head. The calculation of how this masterpiece could be her ticket to the corner office. She pulled her own phone out, snapped rapid-fire photos of the technical white paper and the core strategy slides, then closed my tablet exactly as I had left it. When I returned, she was sipping her wine, her face a mask of calm, though her breathing was slightly shallow. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," I replied. "Just a bit of water." The weekend was silent. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was at her seaport condo, rebranding my nonsense. She would be changing the fonts, adding her own visionary flourishes, and practicing the delivery of words she didn't understand. Monday morning, the notification hit my inbox at 8:42 a.m. It was a calendar invite from the CEO's executive assistant. Subject: Emergency Briefing. Revolutionary Revenue Optimization Strategy. Presented by Megan V. Required attendance: Board of Directors, Senior Partners, my name. She had gone straight to the top. She hadn't even run it by the department head. Her greed had blinded her to the most basic rule of corporate survival. Never present data you haven't stress-tested. But Megan didn't think she needed to test it. She thought it was mine, and she thought my work was infallible. I walked past her office on the way to the briefing. She was standing at her window, looking out at the city, her hands on her hips in a classic power pose. She didn't even look at me. She didn't need the admin support anymore. She had the Aurora clause. I went to the break room and prepared my espresso. I made sure it was perfect. Double shot, no sugar. I checked my reflection in the chrome of the machine. I didn't look like a woman about to lose her career's worth of work. I looked like a spectator at a controlled demolition. I walked into the boardroom at 10:55 a.m. The CEO, Mr. Sterling, was already there. He was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, sharp gray eyes and a mouth that didn't know how to smile. He hated wasting time. He hated fluff. Megan entered a minute later, clutching her own tablet like a holy relic. She gave me a brief, dismissive nod. "Let's make this quick, Megan," Sterling said, leaning back. "You claimed over the weekend that you found a way to bridge the Q3 gap and revolutionize our integration model. Big words. I hope the data is bigger." "It is, Mr. Sterling," Megan said, her voice resonant and confident. "I call it the ORIS methodology. It's a total paradigm shift." I sat in the back corner, adjusted my Cartier watch, and took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. The theater was about to begin. The lights dimmed, and the first slide of the ORIS deck bloomed across the screen. Megan stood at the head of the table, her shadow long and imposing against the glowing $4.8 million projection. For the first 10 minutes, she was a virtuoso of vacuum. She glided through the first 8 slides, tossing out terms like asynchronous growth verticals with a rhythmic confidence that seemed to mesmerize the senior partners. But I wasn't watching the partners. I was watching Mr. Sterling. Sterling hadn't moved. He sat with his chin resting on his interlaced fingers, his gray eyes tracking the movement of a chart on slide 12, a chart I had specifically designed to look like a complex growth trajectory, but which actually modeled the thermal dissipation of a cooling engine. It was beautiful, technical, and entirely irrelevant to revenue. I saw the first bead of sweat break on Megan's hairline when Sterling shifted his weight. "Go back," Sterling said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Megan's sentence like a blade. Megan blinked, her smile faltering for a microsecond. "To the monetization loop? Of course, it's a vital component of—" "No," Sterling interrupted. "Slide 9, the synergistic integration loop. You've listed a projected overhead reduction of 22% based on automated emotional intelligence mapping. Explain the math on that. Walk me through the API integration between the CRM and the EQ buffer." The silence that followed was heavy. Megan's hand hovered over the tablet. She hadn't expected a how. She had spent her weekend memorizing the wow. "Well," Megan started, her voice climbing an octave, "the mapping leverages the core scalability of the AI-driven sentiment analysis to bypass traditional friction points." "That's a marketing brochure, Megan," Sterling said, leaning forward. The granite in his face seemed to harden. "I'm asking for the technical architecture. You said this was your weekend project. You must have the raw data. How does the ORIS nexus calculate the delta between client sentiment and Q3 spend?" Megan looked down at her tablet as if it might whisper the answer to her. She scrolled frantically, her fingers leave smudges on the glass. She was looking for the white paper text, but I had written it in a way that required a foundational understanding of quantitative calculus to decode. To someone like Megan, it was just a wall of sophisticated-looking symbols. It's an proprietary algorithm," she stammered. Her unearned confidence was evaporating, replaced by a raw, primal panic. She looked at the senior partners, pleading for a distraction, but they were now looking at Sterling. The wind had shifted. I can have the dev team pull the specific logs," she tried, her voice cracking. "The dev team?" Sterling asked, his eyebrows rising. "You told me this was a revolutionary insight you developed independently. If you don't know the math behind your own strategy—" "What exactly are we doing here?" Megan turned her head toward me. It was the look of a drowning person seeing a life raft. Her eyes were wide, watery, and desperate. She was waiting for the admin mouse to scurry forward and save her, to provide the technical weeds she was currently choking on. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I simply lowered my espresso cup, the porcelain clicking softly against the saucer. The sound was tiny, but in that silent room, it sounded like a gavel. The boardroom had become a vacuum. The only sound was the low hum of the projector, casting the ORIS nexus diagram across Megan's pale, trembling face. She was no longer a rising star. She was a glitch in the system. I I think there might be a formatting error in the export, Megan stammered, her fingers trembling as she tapped the screen of her tablet. The technicalities they're quite dense. Perhaps my associate can clarify the data entry. She looked directly at me. It wasn't a request. It was a command disguised as a plea. She expected me to do what I had always done: step into the gap, provide the brilliance, and let her keep the crown. Mr. Sterling turned his head slowly, his gray eyes settling on me like two lead weights. Well, you're the one who handles the analytical audits for this department. Have you seen this ORIS methodology? Does the math hold up? I didn't rush to speak. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. I didn't lean forward. I didn't show excitement. I kept my posture clinical, my expression as flat as a spreadsheet. I'm afraid I'm at a loss, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice steady and clear. I've never seen these concepts before in my life. Megan's jaw actually dropped. What? We discussed the growth verticals on Friday. We discussed a stain on my tablet over lunch, Megan, I replied, my tone sharpening just enough to draw blood. But this optimal revenue integration strategy, to be perfectly honest, I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to make sense of it. From a technical standpoint, it appears to be incoherent. Incoherent? Sterling barked the word. Yes, sir, I continued, finally standing up and walking toward the screen. I pointed to the centerpiece of her presentation. For instance, this chart on slide 15. It claims to track monetization loops, but the formula embedded in the legend is actually a derivative of a thermodynamic cooling cycle. It has nothing to do with finance. And the ORIS Nexus acronym? If you look at the underlying variables she's using, they don't actually exist in our CRM. I looked at Megan. It looks like a collection of buzzwords designed to sound impressive without actually saying anything. I assumed, since you scheduled an emergency briefing with the CEO, that you had discovered some secret proprietary data I wasn't privy to. Megan's face went from pale to a sickly mottled red. You're lying. You had the files. I saw them on your tablet. You're trying to sabotage me because you're jealous. The room went ice cold. To accuse a colleague of sabotage in front of the board without a shred of proof is the corporate equivalent of pulling the pin on a grenade while holding it to your own chest. Sterling stood up. He didn't look angry. He looked disgusted. You saw the files on her tablet? So you're admitting that you took a revolutionary strategy from another analyst's device, branded it as your own weekend project, and brought it to me without understanding a single line of the logic? No, that's not... I refined it. You didn't refine anything, Megan, Sterling snapped. You couldn't even explain the math on slide 9. You brought a polished vacuum into my boardroom and wasted the time of every partner at this table. He turned to the head of IT, who was sitting near the door. Mark, I want a full forensic audit of Megan's local drive and her cloud access from the last 72 hours. I want to know exactly where these slides came from, and if any proprietary firm data was compromised during her research. Megan began to hyperventilate. The golden child was shattering in real time. She looked at the senior partners, the men she had charmed with green juices and visionary talk, but they had all turned their chairs away. In this firm, there is nothing more contagious than failure. Mr. Sterling, please, Megan sobbed, her voice losing its corporate sheen and becoming high and jagged. I was just trying to show initiative. I thought the firm needed a win. The firm needs competence, Megan, Sterling said, already gathering his papers. What it doesn't need is a thief who isn't even smart enough to understand what she's stealing. He looked at me for a long moment. There was a new flicker of recognition in his eyes. He saw the Cartier watch. He saw the untouched, perfect espresso. He saw the woman who had sat in total silence while a parasite tried to feast on a poison pill. "The meeting is terminated," Sterling announced. "Megan, leave your tablet on the table and go directly to HR. Mark will escort you to ensure you don't access the server on your way out." Megan didn't move at first. She looked at the screen, where the $4.8 million lie was still glowing. Then she looked at me. I leaned back against the mahogany table, adjusted my cuff, and gave her a very thin, very cold smile. It was the smile of a circuit breaker clicking into place. She didn't say another word. She was led out of the room by the IT director, her heels clicking on the hardwood. But this time, the rhythm was frantic, broken, and weak. I stayed behind for a moment, finishing my espresso as the partners filtered out in hushed tones. The air in the room felt cleaner. The friction was gone. The engine was finally the only thing left in the room.
The fallout was as clinical as the setup. The IT audit didn't just find the ORIS deck. It found the photos Megan had taken of my tablet, time-stamped while I was in the restroom at lunch. It also uncovered 18 months of her rebranding my work. She wasn't just fired. She was terminated for gross professional misconduct and the violation of her non-disclosure agreement. Because she had presented a fraudulent strategy to the board, the firm's legal team moved to claw back her last 2 quarterly bonuses. The Seaport condo was back on the market within 45 days. The Porsche was repossessed 3 weeks after that. Megan didn't just lose her job. She lost the entire identity she had built on the back of my labor. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to interview at a boutique firm in Chicago, but the industry is a small, cold circle. Word had traveled. No one wants to hire a visionary who can't do the math. I, on the other hand, didn't have to say a word. A week after the boardroom incident, Mr. Sterling called me into his office. He didn't offer me a seat, and he didn't offer any fluff. He simply handed me a folder. "Your name is on every page of the Harrison audit, the tax restructuring, and the Q2 market analysis," he said, his voice flat but respectful. "Megan's name has been removed, along with her title." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "I don't like being lied to, but I like inefficiency even less. You've been providing 80% of this department's output from a senior associate's desk. That ends today." My new contract included a 40% base salary increase and a profit-sharing incentive that effectively doubled my take-home pay. I moved into the corner office Megan had been eyeing. It's quieter here. The air is thinner, but it's pure. I didn't feel a rush of joy when I saw her LinkedIn profile change to "seeking new opportunities." I didn't feel a pang of guilt when I heard she was moving back in with her parents in Jersey. I felt the same thing I feel when a complex equation finally balances. Relief. The parasite was gone. The host was thriving. I still wear my Cartier watch. I still drink my espresso, double shot, no sugar. But now, when I speak, the room doesn't just listen. They take notes. I realized that being the quiet one was never a disadvantage. It was a camouflage. It allowed me to build my kingdom in the shadows until I was ready to turn on the lights. In the corporate world, people often mistake noise for power and visibility for value. They think that because you are silent, you are empty. They think that because you don't fight for the spotlight, you don't deserve to stand in it. Megan's mistake wasn't just stealing my work. It was assuming that my quiet nature was a lack of teeth. She forgot that the most dangerous part of any machine isn't the one that makes the most noise. It's the one that moves with the most precision. Competence is a quiet fire. It doesn't need to scream to be felt. If you find yourself in a position where a Megan is taking your credit and dimming your light, do not respond with rage. Rage is messy. Rage gives them a weapon to use against you. Instead, respond with excellence so absolute that they become addicted to it. Become their foundation. Build their entire world upon your brilliance. And then, when they are high enough to feel invincible, simply step away. The fall won't be your fault. It will be the natural consequence of their own gravity. I didn't destroy Megan. I just stopped holding her up. I let her own incompetence do the work I was too dignified to do myself. There is no revenge more satisfying than watching a thief try to spend a counterfeit coin you specifically minted for them. If you've ever had to become the villain in their story just to survive yours, hit that like button and share this story. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever dealt with a workplace parasite? And did you wait for them to trip over their own ego?
Don't forget to subscribe. We're building something real here, and the truth always comes out in the end.